take a look at the campus, even you are most welcome. Now talk about the data science research group at Reply to Kottayam. We have around 9 faculty in this research group who are working on various domains of data science, AI, and ML. So you can see, as a slide says, these are the areas in which our faculty are working on. And we are also involved in various data science projects. To name a few, one is uh, with a Microsoft for detecting a plant disease, or specifically the disease in wheat and rice. So, and another one is, in the introduction, it was mentioned something called AI Fora, where we analyze how AI can be used for social assessment, or in other words, how AI can be used to improve the societal standard in a developing country like India, right? Now, I think I think that will be enough as an introduction. Now, to come to today's talk, basically, uh, research-wise, like how machine learning uh, has traveled so far, like, and where exactly right now it is. So that will be the agenda of, say, today's talk. So I'll be trying to give a kind of a more big picture type, or a big picture in research and machine learning. And specifically, we may not have the time to go in depths. So if you are expecting any sort of hands-on programming or any sort of mathematical brainstorming, that may not happen in this session. So I'll be just going in the peripheral this thing, so that if somebody is interested in pursuing any kind of research in machine learning, I'll just talk about what are the or I'll just give you some certain hints and certain directions on how you can take it up, right? So in addition to that, we all know that right now the 5G standard is being completed, right? So already we have started using extensively the 4G standard, right? So with that itself, we know that the kind of data, or the amount of data that is being generated is enormous, right? So uh, both in the academia as well in industry, so there is definitely a more developed cellular communication technique. And obviously, research in 6G has also has kind of catapulted in the last 1.5 years, right? So in the case of 6G, you have around 1 terabyte per second speed. So in just 1 second, you can just transfer 1 terabyte. So you can imagine what all, I mean, how much amount of data, or what are kind of data you can just transfer in a fraction of second, right? So so besides this significant upgrade of key communication metrics, so AI has been envisioned by most computer scientists as well as researchers as the most important feature of 6G, right? So since the state-of-the-art machine learning technique has been adopted as the top solution in many extremely complex scenarios, right from health analytics, or to the space missions, whatever that is happening right now, right? Everywhere you have AI. So along with that, another thing is like the network intelligentization will be a new trend, basically to address the challenges of exponentially increasing number of connected heterogeneous devices, right? So everywhere you have this AI. So there is a lot of hype. There is a lot of thing actually happening. So it's actually sometimes really difficult to differentiate whether something is a hype, or something is just a fantasy which is being told by the media, or whether something is actually happening, right? So I do perfectly understand that taking a lecture or a talk in the afternoon is difficult, and attending such kind of a talk is even more difficult. So I perfectly understand that. So I'll try to make this as interesting as possible. But whether it is interesting or not, that you have to decide. So, so the basic agenda will be, first we'll take a look at the current scenario, what exactly is happening in with AI, ML, or data science. And then I'll talk a little bit about the main challenges which most of the industries whether it is computer science or any other multidisciplinary domain, like what kind of challenges they face when they want to just shift to AI, or when they want to embrace AI, what all difficulties do they face? And after that, I'll just move on to give you a researcher's perspective in this AI and machine learning, right? So we'll just take a look at the current scenario. So we can, one thing is pretty sure that data science is not replacing mathematical physics or engineering, but instead it is actually kind of augmenting it for the 21st century. So you can say that all these technology, whether it is statistics or linear algebra, all these is a more of a renaissance than a revolution. So this is a kind of add-on which actually uh, projects AI and data science in a much better position, right? So if you talk about analytics, so maybe right from the year 2012, you have this analytics 1.0, right? So that is where most of the business, they realize that there is actually a requirement for business intelligence. So this was where the uprising of data warehousing or data mining, where customers and say production process, they were kind of centralized into huge repositories. And if you want to do something, you can just tweak it, and that will help you to make intelligent decisions, right? And then maybe around 2014, you had the second revolution coming, which is in the form of big data, and usually we call it analytics 2.0. So the certain drawbacks of the previous era, that is analytics 1.0, so became more prominent by the day as companies started stepping out of their comfort zone and began their pursuit of a kind of wider or better approach towards attaining a kind of a sophisticated form of analytics, right? So because in the case of big data, maybe the last or previous sessions, you would have heard a lot about big data, machine learning, all these words you would have heard, and I'm sure you would have heard so many excellent sessions. So I'll not be talking much about that, but I just want to give a set of background for what I'll be talking about, right? So basically the need for these powerful tools and the opportunity to make profit out of that were basically the reason why you have a lot of data coming in, and the word big data and all these variety, velocity, all these things people started talking about, right? And then you had this analytics 3.0, where uh, we started kind of getting these things kind of automatic, right? So if you everybody has a smartphone, right? And we are actually very well kind of used to the voice assistants, whether it is Amazon Alexa or whether it is Google Assistant. I don't have to explain how it works or how exactly that has changed our life, right? So the moment you tell, hey Google, good morning, after waking up, Google will automatically tell us like what schedule we have for today, and what is the temperature outside, and it will start reading the news, right? So it is almost like it has become almost like a personal assistant, right? So that is about analytics 3.0 where we are. And the next big jump is going to happen with analytics 4.0, where you have automated capabilities, right? In which you have different kinds of analytics, where it could be descriptive, right? It could be diagnostic, or it could be predictive, and it could be even prescriptive analytics, right? So that is the idea of automated analytics. That means even a non-programmer, or even somebody who's not well versed with any sort of programming, can still start developing application that can do the prediction, or start developing application that can actually uh, analyze things, right? So yeah, maybe if you talk about the last 20 years was all about computer literacy, right? But I'm sure the next 20 years is going to be about uh, analytics literacy. Or in other words, people who doesn't know data science or data analytics are definitely will be on will be on a kind of a disadvantage when compared to people who know data analytics, or who are say who is well versed with data literacy, right? So that is the, even the, if you take a look at something called the Gartner hype cycle, even there also it clearly says this is going to be the future, right? I mean, this is going to be the future. So I've been talking a lot about AI, machine learning, data science. So one of the common question I used to get always in most of the talk is what is the difference? So I'll just start with that. So in the year 2020, that is this particular year, AI we use every day, right? From music recommender system, from your Google Maps or Uber, if you want to book a taxi, right? So, but still there is a confusion between terms AI, machine learning, and deep learning, right? So even that comes like one of the most popular Google search, which says, "Are AI, MI the same thing?" So, so basically, AI is a science just like mathematics or biology. So it studies the ways to build intelligent programs and the machines that can creatively solve problems and will be able to take some kind of decision at the end of that, right? Machine learning is basically a subset of AI that provides the systems the ability to kind of automatically learn and improve from experience without being explicitly programmed. I'm sure you have heard this a lot of time. But in the case of deep learning or deep neural learning, it is a subset of machine learning which uses the neural networks to analyze, say, different factors with a kind of structure similar to our human neural system, right? So I think maybe today, image recognition by machines trained via deep learning, in some scenarios, they are far and way better than human beings, right? So that ranges from identifying a cat or a normal animal to identifying a very complicated, say, tumors in MRI scans, right? So we all know, or you might have heard a lot of times, especially in 2016, Google's AlphaGo learned this game called Go, and it basically learned it by playing it over and over again, right? So after that only you have this lot of craving for even students or researchers to pursue something in deep learning, right? So deep learning has actually, to be frank, has enabled many practical applications of machine learning, and overall it has kind of extended the field of AI, right? You have the driverless cars, or you have better preventive healthcare, and even you have better movie recommendation. The kind of movie recommendation you used to get 2 to 3 years back, that's completely different from what you have today, right? If you have a Netflix or Amazon Prime, the suggestions are almost kind of bang on, right? So with basically with deep learning and the further evolving technologies, you we are sure that AI is going to the next level in the next 4 to 5 years, right? So if you're specifically talking about AI and machine learning, uh, maybe I'm sure that you had a session for machine learning algorithms, where usually you divide the ML algorithms into 4 different groups or 4 different categories, I can say. One is known as supervised learning, where you teach the computer, say, imagine that you have a basket and you teach the computer to put red, blue, and green socks into different baskets. So basically, it is trying to understand what is red, what is blue, and what is green, right? Then that's basically known as supervised learning. Then you have the unsupervised learning, where you do not provide any sort of features to the program. So you just allow the program to search for patterns completely kind of independently. So you have a scenario where you have a very big basket of laundry, and the computer need to separate different categories: socks, t-shirt, or jeans, kind of. So usually we call this kind of process as clustering. I think yesterday you had a very good session in clustering, right? So so basically you divide the data into different groups with some sort of similarity, right? So Then you have something called a semi-supervised learning, right? So here you have a input data, which is a mixture of labeled and unlabeled samples, right? And the programmer has in mind a desired prediction outcome, but basically the model must find the patterns to structure the data and make predictions itself, right? And also you would have heard of reinforcement learning. So it's very similar to how humans learn, or how a small baby learns right from his birth to become an adult. He learns so many things, right? So basically, for such kind of learning, you actually don't need constant supervision to learn effectively, right? But basically, in the case of reinforcement, you receive a kind of positive signal if you're doing something good, and if it is something negative, you receive a kind of negative signal. So imagine that a child learns not to touch a hot vessel. Basically, once he touches, he feels the pain, so then he understands, okay, when I do this, this is happening, right? So that's a kind of reinforcement learning, right? So when you talk specifically of AI, so as I already mentioned, AI basically makes a decision on our behalf. That's a very simple explanation of AI. So there are the concept of this kind of artificial intelligence. It is there right from the 1950s, and maybe at that time the true possibility was not explored to the core. And later, a generation of a set of scientists, mathematicians, philosophers, all had the concept of AI. But till Alan Turing, I think in 1950s, he suggested that if humans use available information as well as a reason to solve a problem and make decision, then why can't machine do the same thing? So with this thought process, he actually published a paper in 1950, but things couldn't advance at that time. So from 1950s to 70s, it was kind of it was stalled, I will say. So, and funding was also an issue, because after the World War, even the developed nations couldn't invest much on this, the research related to this. So that's the reason why till 70s, it was a kind of a stagnant thing about AI. But in the early 80s, that's where two scientists, they actually coined something called this deep learning, which we use extensively today. So, so obviously you might have a kind of a intuition why I mean, where was this deep learning in the last 20 years or last 15 years, right? So even though the concept was there, we never had the required hardware computational facility to run that kind of a concept, right? So that's the reason why it was not until 2000 you couldn't achieve much with AI, right? So initially it had started with kind of rule-based system, right? But later on it started improving. So maybe in today's AI research, it actually is constantly and continuously growing. And over the last 5 years, AI research has grown by almost 13% annually worldwide. So most of the companies started embracing AI, and we actually right now we live in a way, or live in a world where every company is running behind this AI and deep learning, right? So one of the interesting fact about deep learning is that in most of the AI part, or in AI, the deep learning part could be just 5%. So majority of the thing will come from the domain where you're working. For example, the kind of project which I'd worked with Microsoft, in that you're actually trying to detect the diseases in wheat and rice, right? But so being a computer scientist, I don't know much about the diseases in wheat and rice. So we actually gather 95% of the information from botanical scientists and from the normal farmers, and that's how actually we are able to do something, or we are able to create a model. So most of the time, the domain specialist, in the case of the sweet disease or rice disease, basically agricultural scientists will contribute 95% for the solution. right? So this is just an interesting comparison. Like basically, whatever research we do, ultimately we are trying to achieve what this small brain of us is capable of doing, right? So if you just compare the power computation which is taken by each of the supercomputers, right from 1997 to the Google's AlphaGo, it is a very huge number you have over there. So when compared to what our brain is capable, that actually has only around 20 watt. So this is a kind of man versus machine chronicle, right? So something which almost takes the power of a say a substation that is required for Google's AlphaGo, but maybe our brain just takes only 20 watt, right? So so basically, obviously the thought is, what does make a man superior, or what does how does this brain become superior, right? So basically, if you notice, all these things, they are kind of specific to some particular domain, right? Google's AlphaGo, it is very good in playing the game called the Go. But if you just ask it something else, it may not perform that much, right? Because obviously you need to again rewire, or you want to uh, write a different program, right? If that was not the case, it would have been of something of this sort. You create one model, and that will be a kind of a solution to all the problems in this world, right? But that is not happening. So one such reason is your brain is basically, it is actually working on analog signals, but in the case of the kind of programs or the kind of machineries what we are developing right now, it is mostly on the digital side, right? So another problem with or the challenge which we usually face is that usually you cannot write a program which is ambiguous. So those of you are from computer science background, you will be I assume that you know this particular keyword called ambiguity, right? So ambiguous means that you need to clearly tell what to do to this computer. If there is any sort of confusion, if I'm just saying that, see, if the traffic is bad, you take me to this route, right? So if I'm talking about, or if I'm talking like to a human being, that human being can understand what do you mean by bad traffic, right? But a computer, usually it actually looks for specific things. Yeah. So you'll be looking for I'm sorry. Yeah. So you'll be looking for specific things, and it will ask what exactly is meant by bad traffic, right? You need to clearly define. So usually we say like the two profession which encashes because of ambiguity, or the two kind of professions where they kind of utilize this ambiguity. One is lawyers, and the other one is chartered accountants. So that is the reason why a case which was kind of the judge in a lower court made a decision, and sometimes you see that in the upper court, the same case, you have a different ruling, right? The problem is even our constitution or whatever laws we compose, there are a lot of ambiguous elements in that. So that's the reason why human beings will be able to interpret it in this way or that way, right? The same goes with chartered accountants, right? I'm not saying that it's a very bad profession, but this is where actually this example fits in, right? So so it's actually not possible in the near future, or I mean, sorry, near future, where you can have a machine as a judge, right? So it won't be possible unless and until laws become so unambiguous. So the moment you start creating unambiguous rules, then only you will be able to replace the courts with computers, right? Okay. Now, so obviously, then you'll have a question like, how exactly an algorithm you design is different from an algorithm you run a computer on a computer, or how when a computer runs, how exactly it goes on, right? So For example, I'll just quickly show you this. So how a brain is computing, right? So it is very easy to compute. If somebody is asking 923 divided by 21, you can easily say that, yeah, it is either true or false, even without doing any computation, right? The reason is you just divide it and you know that 21 multiplied by 2 is 42. So definitely it is not 2. So whatever you say, you can easily say that it is the answer is true. But when I make it a little more complex, you need to do some amount of computation, but still you'll be able to answer that, right? So the point which I'm trying to say is, once if you're asking the exact answer, you will not be able to do that. The reason is our brain is a wonderful approximation machine or approximation computing machine. So it doesn't do the all the calculation just like a computer, right? So that's the reason why basically you may not get the required accuracy when you're doing it here, but the kind of approximation the brain is capable of doing, that is a kind of matchless with any other machine. I'll just show you an example. If you can read this, that will be great. So this is one of the reason or one of the characteristics which you can identify where all these words are kind of jumbled, but still you will be able to read it. The reason is brain does a lot of approximation, right? It is actually not reading the whole word. Instead of that, it just sees the first and the last, and then it makes kind of an assumption, right? So this is we are in a situation where you have the traditional programming, and now you have the machine learning, right? I'm not going to explain because you have already had a lot of sessions in machine learning. So the crux is you have AI everywhere, right from the instant translators or voice assistants or warehouse management or medical image analysis, or kind of even in creativity. Like you can even ask a computer to draw a painting, and it can even do that, right? So I'm sure you have been staring at the screen for the last, say, 30 minutes. So it is actually really good. You take a break, right? So just take a moment or take a 1 minute to think about current AI and ML scenario, and just you move your eyes away from the screen. Okay. Yeah. So before I talk about the research challenges in academia or any sort of research challenges in machine learning, it's always good to know what exactly is happening in the industry. So usually, the kind of research, whatever that is happening, most of the time what happens is usually there is a gap between what is happening in industry and what is happening in academia, right? So usually it may not sync, right? So what I felt is before going on to going and seeing what is the research challenge which you can take it up, or which you may want to pursue, it is always a very good idea to take a look what exactly is happening in the industry, right? So the major challenges, there are two kinds of thing which usually most of the uh, either it is a startup or whether it is a very big giant in data science, still most of them they actually face the same set of challenges. Or in other words, they may have data related issues or resource related. Especially startups, most of the time they have both of these issues, but for giants they may have only very few out of these, right? So if you think about the data, right from data collection itself, all the companies face a lot of challenges. So right from Google to say Facebook, everybody is basically giving all these services just free to us, right? We're not paying anything, right? So basically, ultimately, their goal is data collection. Using that data collection, they'll be able to kind of make insights out of that, and ultimately that can really kind of affect the business decisions of other companies. Basically, that's what all these social media platforms are about, right? So I'm not just saying this in a vague manner. There are a lot of proofs. If you can just Google about it, you will get to know about it. There are even court verdict by the US federal courts. Multiple verdicts are there in which these firms were actually asked for their data deals, and they didn't reveal it, right? So obviously, what I'm saying is with reference to that, right? Now, basically the resource related issues, especially in machine learning or whether it is in deep learning, is with respect to the training time and the computational complexity or the computational efficiency, right? So these are the common issues. So I thought I'll just touch upon this, and then we'll move on to the actual research challenges. So basically, if when a company want to embrace machine learning, these are some of the challenges, where one of the most common thing is where you have inaccessible data or you have a lot of data security. So the trade-off between security, privacy, and the kind of analysis, that is a very tricky one, and it's very difficult to find a balance between these three, right? So that is, gathering the data is not only the concern. So basically, you may also have to say process the data or find an algorithm where it will work best, right? And also with respect to data security, you may have a lot of issues, right? And the other cases where the infrastructure requirements for testing and experimentation. So most companies that are facing machine learning challenges have these things in common among themselves. So if you take a case of a startup, they may lack proper infrastructure, which is essential for data modeling and reusability. So proper infrastructure obviously aids the testing of different tools, where there are even tools which will allow you, where like you just drag and drop the data set and it will start doing all the process on its own, a kind of drag and drop feature. There are a lot of tools available in the market. So and another thing is, companies that lack infrastructure requirements used to say consult with other firms to model their data groups aptly, and this kind of a method will work best for the startup. And another thing is, basically if companies are having a rigid business model, so then like they'll have a very hard time in implementing AI or machine learning in their domain, right? And obviously the most problem is lack of talent, right? So this is the most worrying challenge faced by businesses in machine learning while adopting. And that is one of the reason why you have a lot of media hype about this machine learning and AI, right? So while the number of machine learning enthusiasts has increased in the market, it still take a while for the same numbers to reflect on the number of machine learning experts, right? Usually I have seen that students, especially UG students, they'll be well versed with Python, and somehow they can make a program work and something will come out of that, right? But most of the time they find it difficult to understand how exactly it works and on the background, or what kind of techniques have been applied for coming up with such kind of an application, right? So with AI and machine learning being relatively younger technologies in the IT industry, the talent pool required to fully understand and implement this complex machine learning algorithms is kind of limited. So if you don't have the right people to implement it, then it is basically difficult to unlock the true potential of machine learning applications, right? So as you already know, data scientist is one of the most highly paid job in the last 2 to 3 years. So and you have immense opportunity, and obviously that is going to stay there like this. That is, this kind of a wave is going to stay at least for the next 5 to 10 years, right? And another problem where they find it difficult is basically some implementation, it is very time consuming, because even in our labs, there are certain models which might take 6 to 7 days to kind of give some useful insights, right? So basically you need a lot of patience, and one of the most common machine learning challenges, impatience. So if you are impatient, then it's very difficult to thrive with this machine learning. So basically you have a lot of uncertainties. It's like when you do PhD, sometimes you have a lot of uncertainty, like what happens next, right? So when you do a machine learning project also, the same is applicable. You go with certain assumptions, and after spending a month or two, then you realize that whatever you assumed was completely wrong, right? So basically it involves a lot of say intricate planning and detailed execution, but still it's basically a teamwork. And but sometimes even with a teamwork, things can go wrong, right? So that uncertainty is actually a fact. And the final thing is basically the affordability. So if you're looking to adopt machine learning, you will require data engineers, then basically the where so that basically you can deploy the required infrastructure and the required softwares or the required kind of frameworks for managing or for processing your huge chunks of data. So then there are other things like when you have a new problem, you may have to understand like what kind of approach will be best for that particular problem, right? So, and another case is basically with respect to budgeting. So that might vary from organization to organization. So so if you are, so basically machine learning experts are kind of adequate or a kind of a are now present in most of the companies as a adequate element, right? So if you I'm not going to explain about these applications, because you would have heard a lot of things, a lot of stories about that. But the one thing I want to stress on with this ML application is, I just want to stress on one thing, where usually the current trend as it goes on, you have, if somebody has a lot of exposure in Python, there are a lot of packages where you can just type one single line of code, and if you type 2 or 3 codes, you can easily do a face recognition, or you can easily detect something, right? So we live in a such kind of a world, right? So so recent advances in machine learning methods, they actually basically promise a set of very powerful tools for practicing as well as for implementing, right? You have a Python, you have MATLAB, you have a language called Go, you have R language, and even C and C++ programs are widely used for machine learning. But out of this, Python has become the most popular, right? And it has the reputation of being a very effective programming language, and it is being heavily used in scientific computing applications, right? And of course, you have MATLAB also, where it actually gives a lot of advantage when you have a lot of number crunching applications. So what I would say is both Python and MATLAB are kind of a plug and play programming languages, where you have a huge or humongous array of packages, and you just need to find the package, and you just need to understand how it works, and that will get your job done, right? So out of this, there is a very evolving language, which some of you would have heard, that is a programming language called Julia. So that is very significant in the case of high performance scientific computing and data analysis. So it can kind of mature, or it can even pave out other languages, even Python, in the next few years, because it works beautifully, especially with linear algebra and fast Fourier transforms. And another thing is with respect to the advantages. If you have a very high dimensional computing, it has a lot of advantages, and also constantly, almost on a weekly basis, they are adding a lot of libraries, right? So especially if you want to implement some kind of a machine learning thing on a hardware, say imagine that you want to do something on a Raspberry Pi. So then this language is definitely going to help you a lot in the future. Right now, the percentage of users who are actually making use of this language is a very minority, but it is predicted that that is going to even overrule Python in the next 5 to 6 years, right? So it is a very highly competitive language in data science and scientific computing, right? So obviously, the question is, if you in industry, basically, if you want to move on to industry with this data science or machine learning or any sort of these things, the one thing which requires is just if you can just implement something in a programming language. More than that, it is even required to understand how exactly things are being done at the background, right? If you're calling a particular package, you should be able to tell what exactly is actually happening inside that, right? Because even 1 million people can do the same thing, that is just call the package and just do whatever things you want, right? For the time being it will work, but the current research, it clearly shows that you will get, or you will start getting tools where you can just drag and drop your data and the tool will do the whole set of process just for you, right? So when it comes to that point, so if you are really serious about machine learning research, then that's where the significance of understanding what happens at the background, right? So obviously for that, you need to improve your analytical abilities, right? So with respect to AI and ML, usually we say as an individual, it is difficult to achieve something in this, right? You might be good in coding, you might be good in certain areas, but still, rather than individual based or individual centric research approach, a teamwork is always preferred to actually improve your analytical ability, right? So usually from a student perspective, we say that we ask them to do more internship, even with startup. We ask them to work with real data set. You provide them with real data set so that they'll be able to work on such kind of data, and they'll be, even their thought process will be tailored to deal with these kind of real problems, right? And obviously, basically we do all this for meeting the wants, like unless and until something is very useful, then only it makes sense to do that, right? So if you take on the industry perspective, although a lot of research is going on, that will be on the application side. That is, they're focusing on a product-based research, right? So recently, I've come across something called this kind of a board where this is actually in Bangalore, where Robert Bosch has installed in some bus stops in Bangalore, where it will show the next bus to Bangalore airport on a real basis or real-time basis, right? So you would have seen the same thing even in metros, but since this was a photo I clicked some time back, I just kept it here. So obviously, whenever you have a AI unit in an industry, what they think is what can be added to this kind of a system. Okay, it is saying that next bus will come in 9 minutes. What else can I add into that, right? So you may have to think it from a user perspective or a customer perspective. So when I'm saying customer or user perspective, as a user, if you're standing at the bus stop, what all things will go in your mind, right? So if I'm standing there, my obvious in my mind, I have a question like whether the next bus will be crowded, right? Or whether do I have any vacant seats in that upcoming bus, right? So obviously, most of the time, industry, they look on this thing and they keep coming up with a lot of application, right? And ultimately, all this is going on with this mobility sharing and traffic management. Even a lot of work is going on, right? So AI plus your imagination can really work wonders, right? That's what the industry is mostly focused on. And regarding the mobility sharing, especially with the COVID, you have a lot of innovative applications coming up, because you have a lot of restrictions in the public transport system and you can't meet all the needs, right? So you have lot of techniques to reduce the congestion and increase or to basically enhance your efficiency from moving from point A to point B, right? So there, ultimately to just, I'm sorry, yeah. Ultimately to just put it in a single capsule, these are the different challenges usually the industry is facing. So driving them all together and being successful with their project, that is a kind of real focus. Even product-based companies, even though they have a lot of research wings, but still ultimately they are worried about the success to be successful with their products, right? So obviously all these products will be, it will vary, it may have massive size and it will vary with complexity. So I'll just show you an interesting video. So this is from Facebook. Yeah, let me play that. So this is a kind of journey from right from 2013 to the current scenario, how the AI detection has improved, right? So earlier it was just able to detect the shape, right? So after that, it started improving. So then came, you have the recurrent CNN model. And it has gone to a level where it can even detect what kind of what brand you're wearing or what kind of dress you're wearing, and it can even do the identify and ask you whether, like, is this what you're wearing, right? So it has gone from a very primitive this thing to a level where you actually, the user is getting a lot of benefit out of this, right? So right from 2013 to 2020, right? Now, so when it comes to academia as well as the industry, so obviously when you talk about machine learning, data science, and AI, ultimately you create a model, right? And you just think and you just decide whether whatever model I developed is a good one or not, right? So usually I tell an example. Usually most of the time what people does is, imagine that somebody has done some coding on random forest algorithm. So they have predicted something, right? So usually the question I used to ask them, okay, you got this as the accuracy. Now, if I ask him, why did you go for random forest model? Most of the time, they will find it difficult to answer that, right? Whether it is a good fit or why don't you try the other model? What variables are actually impacting the output? So these kind of questions are kind of difficult. If you just use some code segments and you just do something, you may not understand what exactly is happening, right? So so basically, from a customer point of view, or as well as a researcher point of view, even if you talk about R square, p value, etc., right? So why you have considered some variable and why you have ignored the other one, right? So unless and until you will, if you're able to explain it in a that way, then only it makes sense to say that you're actually working in a machine learning project, right? Because the reason why I'm saying is, you can see here, you have a very huge list of tools you can see here, right? You have something happening in like storage framework, some things for computer vision, you have some things for say application enterprise, you have specific things for data governance, you have specific things for transportation, right? So ultimately, out of this, it is impossible to learn all the tools, right? So whenever if you're working on a tool also, still, if you know what is happening in the background, it will be very easy for you to switch into another tool. Because maybe today Python is very crucial, or Python has a lot of users. Maybe next day, when some other language like Julia comes in, Python might be in a situation where what happened to Java? Like Java, the usage of Java has reduced in the last 5-6 years, right? So the point which I'm telling is basically, even if you're able to scale, everything is fine, but the idea is you need to learn principles and techniques more than these tools. The always, if you learn the principles and techniques, then that is going to give you more value if you are whether you are working in a project, or whether you are teaching to students, or whether you are working in industry. That is going to really will be a kind of a game changer, right? So we'll take a very small break once again. So let me just, yeah. Okay, right. So we have been talking about machine learning and AI from initially we started with what exactly is it, what is the current scenario. Then we have talked about what exactly the industry is expecting and what is happening in industry, right? So at the same time, we need to remember that whenever we say about analytics or machine learning or AI, always remember that it can fail, right? So recently, I remember reading an article from I think Harvard Business Review by Thomas Davenport. So where he was explaining about a project where a team of scientists were working for an analytical solution for lung cancer. So AI and machine learning is heavily used in medical imaging, right? So for this particular project, they have spent around $65 million, and they developed a model. Okay, so the goal of this model is to predict whether a person has lung cancer or not, right? And after spending this much of money, so they realized at the end of that the model they developed was unable to make any prediction. So AI, data science, machine learning, all these three has the potential to catapult any industry, but we have to get it right, right? So the crux is, when a task can be automated at the low cost, the task will be automated, right? So ultimately, for that automation, you may go for different kinds of machine learning algorithms, right? Depending on what kind of problem you're dealing with. If you're going for a kind of a prediction, you have a one set of algorithms. If you want to just do some kind of analysis, you have a different set, right? So instead of explaining this, what I'll do is, initially I'll just talk a little things about machine learning technology, right? So you have researchers which develop, and they have applied new machine learning technologies, right? So maybe 5 years back, the only word we used to hear was just machine learning everywhere, and now you have deep learning, right? So similar to that, there are other technology which may have a lot of new application domains. So before we discuss that, I'll first provide a brief introduction to a few important machine learning technologies, what you can see on the slide. So basically, as you might be knowing, deep learning is a very multi-layer, non-linear neural network, and it can directly learn from raw data. It can automatically extract and abstract features from layer to layer, and then it may be able to achieve the goal of regression or classification or clustering or ranking, right? So deep learning has definitely made a lot of breakthroughs in computer vision, speech processing, then you have natural language processing, and it has reached to a point where it's sometimes it looks like it even surpasses a human level of understanding, right? So the success of deep learning is mainly due to three factors. One is big data. The other one is the big model, what it has. And the third thing is basically now you have the hardware infrastructure to do this big computing. So big data, big model, and big computing, right? So in the past few decades, if you take, you have different architectures of deep neural networks, and maybe some of you might be knowing, like if you talk about convolutional neural network, where it is mostly used in image and video processing, uh, and you have something called recurrent neural networks, which can process sequential data of variable length, and have been very commonly used in NLP related or speech processing related tasks. Right? Then you have something called encoder decoder framework, which is usually used for image or kind of sequence generation, such as say machine translation or text summarization, or if you want to label your images, kind of image captioning. Right? These are the different applications. Right? So then you talk about reinforcement learning. So I'll just skip that because already I think I have talked a few things about reinforcement learning. So then I'll just talk about transfer learning. So the goal of transfer learning is to transfer the model, or basically the knowledge obtained from one source task to another target task in order to resolve the issues of insufficient training data in the target task. This is actually very relevant, especially if you're working with uh, in a situation where you have it's difficult to get very little amount of data. So in those cases, you may have to kind of replicate the data, or replicate in the sense scientifically, you may have to do some sort of replication, right? So in that case, the rationality of doing so lies in that usually the source and target tasks will have some kind of intercorrelation, and therefore either the features or samples or even the model in the source task might provide some useful information to solve the target task in a much better way, right? So that's about a transfer learning. And then you have adversarial learning. So the conventional deep generative model has a potential problem. So the model tends to generate extreme instances to maximize the probabilistic likelihood, which will hurt its performance. So in adversarial learning, it utilizes the adversarial behaviors, like say, example, generating adversarial instances or training an adversarial model to enhance the robustness of the model. Or you would have heard of something called the generative adversarial networks, more commonly known as GAN or JAN network. So it is heavily used in both image, speech, and text, right? Then you have something called dual learning, where it's a relatively new learning paradigm, where the basic idea is to use the primal dual structure between machine learning task to obtain a effective or feedback from that process, and then guide and strengthen the learning process. So this actually reduces the requirement for a large scale labeled data for deep learning. So I remember working on a forestry related project with the University of New Brunswick, Canada, where actually the task was to basically do detect the or measure the forest resources from a lot of images like LiDAR images. I'll not go much into that. Just 1 minute, I'll just say what was the problem we encountered there. So over there, the problem was you have a lot of images, and we even need to appoint one person just for the labeling task itself, right? So, but with this dual learning, you can actually avoid that, and it can even be applied to say things like image classification and generation, or text classification and generation, image to text or text to image, and all these problems. This kind of human intervention or manual intervention can be reduced if you go for this dual learning. Then you have something called a distributed machine learning. So this will actually speed up the computation, and ultimately it will significantly improve the efficiency and this kind of enlarge the application domain, right? So So basically you will have a lot of hiccups or a lot of roadblocks which you encounter, especially for setting up the distributed environment. But if you're successful in doing that, that will be a very good option to take up, right? So then the last thing, meta learning, that's an emerging research direction in machine learning. So meta learning concerns learning how to learn and focuses on the understanding and the adaptation of learning itself, instead of just completing a specific learning task. That is, a meta learner needs to be able to evaluate its own learning methods and adjust its learning methods according to specific learning task, right? So, but if I'm saying in the peripheral way, it sounds more similar to reinforcement learning, but it is completely different. If you're interested, you can just read papers related to meta learning, right? Now, coming to the major research areas, which has a lot of potential, maybe in the next 5 years, these are the 5 things. So this is my perception. So while there have been much progress in machine learning, we need to equally understand the fact that there are also challenges. For example, one of the main challenges, mainstream machine learning technologies. You talk about deep learning, or you talk about concurrent neural network, or you talk about recurrent neural network, and all these things, they are kind of a black box approaches, right? So which means that you don't know what is happening inside that, or sometimes you will be in a position where you were expecting some result, but it was giving something else, right? So in all these cases, to tackle this sort of a challenge, we may want to make machine learning more explainable and kind of more controllable. So again, I'm just reminding you about just using some packages and implementing it over there. You might not know what is actually happening in that package, what exactly is being done, right? So, so as another example, imagine that sometimes, or not sometimes, most of the time, most of the deep learning algorithms, the computational complexity is on a higher side. And if you want to do the same thing in a small device, imagine that you're doing a kind of a IoT related project and you want to do something over there, right? So then you may have to make that algorithm into a lightweight algorithm for implementation purpose, right? So in the field of machine learning, we can reveal simple laws instead of designing more complex models for data fitting, right? So that is all about explainable ML. So I'll not be talking about all the 5, but specifically, I'll be talking more about explainable machine learning because we have the time only for that. So I'll not be talking more about the other things, but I'll just give you a peripheral view about the other things like quantum ML. Along with that, say lightweight machine learning and edge computing. So we know that like in the edge computing, that is where you have a lot of significance in the last mile. That is, you do the computation on a different device, and you don't need to actually transfer this data or communicate the data to a different place, right? So basically, data transmission bandwidth and kind of task response delay will be kind of minimal. And when you are training large amount of data, that is really beneficial, because this will actually reduce the response delay, right? And another aspect is a combination of ML with security, right? You have a lot of things happening like say blockchain or lightweight cryptography. So many things are happening, right? So edge devices can how to guarantee security of the sensitive data collected using these edge devices, right? And another upcoming domain where a lot of things are being happening is quantum machine learning. So it is again an interdisciplinary research area at the overlap of quantum computing and machine learning. So quantum computers use effects such as quantum coherence or quantum entanglement to process this information, which is fundamentally completely different from classical computers. So quantum algorithms have kind of surpassed best classical algorithms in several problems. So the moment you have a physical implementation of quantum machine coming up, on that day, the complexity is going to reduce, and so the meeting of quantum computing with machine learning, it can be kind of mutually beneficial to both the domains, that is both quantum computing as well as machine learning. So it actually gives an advantage of quantum computing to improve the performance of classical machine learning algorithms, right? So even with from a linear algebra, if you're working on a matrix related problems, or if you have a lot of number crunching problems, then quantum machine learning can really be a breakthrough, which may happen in a few years. So then you have something called quantum reinforcement learning. So here actually a quantum agent interacts with the classical reinforcement learning environment to obtain rewards from the environment, right? So as I already mentioned, I'll be talking more about only explainable ML. So the other things I'll just touch upon. The other thing is social ML. So basically, this is where, of course, even though I have given a picture with a lot of social media website, the idea is to basically come up with interpretable, intelligent algorithms where you put some amount of psychology or sociology onto those algorithms, right? So the idea of social is kind of constituted of billions of humans, and the social machine learning will be kind of a multi-agent system with individual machines, right? So so the machines will be kind of participating in the social interactions as well, right? So it will kind of the thought process will be more of a kind of a human way, right? So actually some of the existing methods in machine learning are inspired by social machine learning. For example, if you think about knowledge distillation, which is described as the most simplified influence among machines, may potentially model the way humans receive knowledge, right? So obviously, since humans are social beings, social machine learning will be a promising direction to enhance the AI, right? So so the rest of the talk I'll be just mentioning about explainable machine learning. So we'll just dig a little deep into explainable machine learning. So when you talk about machine learning, the ability gap, that is what a machine can achieve and what a human can achieve on many complex cognitive tasks, it becomes much narrower and narrower, especially with the introduction or with the popularization of deep learning technologies, right? So, but we are in the very early stage in terms of explaining why these effective models work and why they don't work at sometimes, right? So basically what is missing here is a gap between correlation and causation. Right? So most machine learning techniques, especially the one related to statistical ones, depend highly on data correlation to make predictions and analysis. But in contrast, we humans tend to rely on clear, trustworthy, or causality relations obtained via logical reasoning on real and clear facts, right? So this is actually one of the core goals of explainable machine learning, to transition from solving problems by data correlation to solving problems by logical reason. So explanation shows as a machine understands the known and is aware of the unknown. So most of the time, when you have a machine learning algorithm, as if the machine thinks that it knows everything, because whatever we have fed in as a program, it knows perfectly fine. So it basically model, analyze, and make decision based on some kind of a historical data, right? But as we all know, machine doesn't have common sense, right? So it will make basic mistakes that humans would not do when facing unseen or rare events, right? So in such cases, just relying on the numbers or just relying on things like, say, statistical accuracy rate cannot be effectively measured for measuring the risk of a decision, right? So sometimes the reasoning behind seemingly a correct decision might be completely wrong, right? So especially for the fields such as medical treatment, nuclear, or aerospace, understanding the supporting facts of decision is a prerequisite for applying machine learning techniques, as explainability implies trustworthiness and reliability. So if you think about countries like United States, they're actually their data laws are pretty solid. So even if you have an algorithm, you should explain to them how exactly it works, and you need to prove that the algorithm is trustworthy and it is reliable. And also you need to prove that it doesn't have any bias. So I remember reading an article where they developed an algorithm for detecting chimpanzee, right? So, but unfortunately, that was done by Google. So the problem with that, even if you're showing the image of a black person, it was actually detecting that to be a chimpanzee. So later, Google actually apologized for this issue, and they just withdraw that particular application, right? So basically, it's all about trustworthiness and reliability. So the near future, explainable machine learning will be definitely an important stepping stone to the deep integration of machine learning techniques in the human society. So definitely it has a lot of demand, not only because of the advancement of technology, but also because of the various non-technical consideration, which includes laws and regulation. So you have in US, you have this general data protection regulation. Even in India, we are thinking about formulating such kind of strong data laws, so that just like that companies, or just like that individuals can extract the data of the public, right? So automatically, say, imagine that if you are applying for a I mean, the significance of explainable machine learning is that, imagine that you are applying for a credit card, right? And you get a message saying that it was just denied, right? But as a person, you need to know why exactly it was rejected, right? So of course, it would have been done by a machine automatically, right? So such kind of an automatic refusal of a credit card application, it doesn't make any sense in today's society. You need to clearly mention why it was rejected, right? So explainability, it also makes possible a kind of a people-centric machine learning evolution, right? So so basically, instead of converting this whole thing, uh, right now, if it is a black box, the idea is to convert that black box into a glass box. So you know the difference between black box and a glass box. Black box is basically you don't know what is happening inside. Glass box means like it's very transparent, you know what is happening inside, and you'll be able to explain, right? So the requirement for explainability can be very different for different applications. So sometimes the explanation aimed at experts are kind of good enough, but maybe for a common man, it may not make sense, right? So ultimately, the bottom line is explainable machine learning will actually kind of solve a lot of practical demands, and will continue to evolve as more needs come out, right? So basically, it's all about this human and I mean the collaboration between human and artificial intelligence, right? So so basically, this will make a model, or if you develop a model, if you are focusing on this interpretability as a key factor, that is definitely going to make your neural network, or make your model definitely more accountable and more trustworthy. So the significance of explainable machine learning or interpretable machine learning, these two words are used like back and forth. So there's an interesting story which will actually tells the significance of this research domain. So the US Army was interested in developing a neural network based algorithm that was able to detect tanks. So patent tanks in army, like sometimes the tanks will be kind of camouflaged with leaves and say dust, and so that you can actually make a move without getting noticed, right? So if the enemy is doing something of that sort, they wanted a system that can actually detect those kind of camouflaged tanks, right? So they have invested some money, maybe few million US dollars, and they developed an algorithm which was able to do this with remarkable accuracy, and everybody was very happy with the result, right? Now, after that, they realized that when it was tested on kind of additional images from a different different geographical location, they identified that it is performing very poorly, right? So the researchers were actually confused because the results had been so positive during the development, that is in the training phase as well as the testing phase. It was very wow kind of a result. So after a while, so everyone started scratching their heads, and one of the researchers noticed that when looking at the two sets of images, uh, the in one particular geographical location, the sky was a little darker. Okay, so it was a kind of a deep blue. The other one, it was a kind of a light blue. So they realized that the algorithm had not actually learned to, just give me a second. Yeah, I'll be taking questions at the end. So basically, the what had happened over there is that the algorithm actually learned to detect sky or the brightness of the sky, and they thought that the algorithm had actually learned to detect this tanks, right? So this kind of funny stories also happen when you don't know what is actually happening inside your neural network, or when you don't know what is happening inside your algorithm, right? So once again, I just stress on this thing: converting your black box into a glass box. That is the motivation for explainable machine learning, right? So you can see here, if you have what is the need for an explainable AI, you'll be able to answer why something happened, or why it was predicted like that, or why it was not like this, right? And when do you succeed, and when, with what kind of images or what kind of data this is likely to fail, right? And whether I can trust this particular model, right? And if I find an error, how do I correct that? So all these things, this explainable AI will be able to kind of do it very beautifully, right? You have a lot of Python packages which actually do this explainable AI. But again, I'm stressing on the other side. If you are serious about machine learning research, please take a look at the background and learn how actually it can be done without using packages, right? Just to see and just to get a look and feel of how exactly something is working. Maybe you can go for this kind of packages, but that is not advisable if you're actually doing, or if you're actually very serious about machine learning research, right? So let me just clear this thing about one thing about explainability and interpretability. So the dictionary meaning of interpret, or the word interpret, it actually means to explain or to present something in understandable terms, right? So in the context of machine learning systems, I just add an emphasis saying that it just provides explanation to humans. That is, to explain or to present in understandable terms to a human, right? So you can see the picture over here. It was predicting something, and some value it came as 42, right? So if you ask this question, why it was predicted as 42, you should, if you're able to give an answer, it means that you are able to interpret your algorithm, right? So in the context of ML and AI, machine learning and AI, so these two words are often used interchangeably, right? So, but it's worth picking the differences. So because then only you'll start seeing, or start seeing how complicated things get once you start digging deeper into machine learning systems, right? So interpretability is all about the extent to which a cause and effect can be observed within a system. Or to put it in another way, let's say, given a change in input or algorithmic parameters, it's being able to look at an algorithm and go and say, yes, I can see what's happening here, right? So something of that sort is all about this interpretability. Now, explainability, in the meanwhile, is a kind of knowing the internal mechanics of that system, right? So it is like, you can put it in this way. Imagine that you are asked to do a kind of science experiment for your kid or for your for someone in school, right? So the experiment, let's say it is a experiment related to chemistry, right? So the experiment might be interpretable. So far, will be interpretable as long as you can see what you are doing, right? So something will be happening, some color change will be happening, something of that sort might be happening, right? But it is only really explainable once you dig into the chemistry behind, and if you can explain that what is happening, then only it becomes explainable, right? So so that's how these two concepts are related. So basically, yeah, that's how you the decision support systems are kind of evolving, like with this explainability and this interpretability, right? So why do we require interpretability, right? So most of the time people ask this question. We wanted to complete some task and we are just happy and content with the results of that model. And why the hell are we bent on knowing why something happened or why a particular decision was made, right? So a lot of this has to do with the impact of that model might have in the real world, right? So for models which are merely meant to recommend movies will have a far less impact than the ones created to predict the outcome of a drug, right? Even if a movie is being recommended in a bad way, or if a recommendation goes wrong, still it is okay. There will not be any danger to life. But if you do it in the case of a drug, that is definitely going to cost a lot, right? So the problem is that a single metric, such as say classification accuracy or any kind of this kind of which shows some value, is an incomplete description of most real world tasks. So some of the benefits of interpretability is if your model is interpretable, then obviously it is improving the reliability. It is improving the debugging nature of that thing. It is actually informing the feature engineering, and also it also help in taking steps like how exactly data could be collected in the future, right? So basically, sometimes, data collection itself becomes a very hard thing when you're actually working on a real data set, right? So another thing is some decisions, if a model actually make it automatically. So imagine that, take the case of Amazon. They don't have any human assistants to decide what to show you whenever you do go to their website. But the important decisions are made by humans. So to make sure that the decision what we meant is rightly reflected on that model. So that's the significance of explainability. So if you have a proper interpretable and explainable algorithm, that will obviously improve the models, and at the same time that is going to uh, improve the trust for your model, right? But everything comes with a cost, right? So that is the trade-off between accuracy and interpretability. So basically, you have certain algorithms which are kind of very bang on, very explainable. Imagine that if you have a decision tree, right? Those of you who have seen a decision tree, they will understand that easily. You can say why a particular decision has arrived, right? But that's not the case with neural networks, right? So so you need to see how this becomes the right tool, right? So if you look in February 2020, Microsoft has released one of the largest deep neural network in existence called Turing NLG, which contains around 17 billion parameters. So which is around 1/5 of the number of neurons which is present in a human brain, So I think our human brain has around 85 million neurons, but what they have, 85 billion neurons, but what they have developed, it has around 17 billion parameters, right? So basically, when you have these many things, it has actually become very hard to explain, right? Why something is being happening, right? So clearly, interpreting a 17 billion parameter neural network is going to be a humongous task. And but one thing is, its performance might be far superior to other models because obviously it is being trained on a very huge data, right? So whenever you need to look at this interpretability, you will be looking at two things. One is on a global scale, that is as such how you can interpret the model, and then for a specific instance, how you will be able to interpret. So usually we call with the term like global interpretations and local interpretations. So global interpretation is all about trying to understand how does the model make predictions and how do the subset of model influence this model decisions, right? So usually complete knowledge of the model structure, the assumptions that you have made, and the constraints are actually required for this global interpretation, right? So obviously, if you're going for a global interpretability, then it will actually facilitate global transparency in machine learning algorithms. And obviously that is going to create a lot more lot more interpretable results in AI and machine learning. So as I mentioned in the very first slide, so this will be kind of very peripheral. We can even talk about global interpretation for 2 hours, but I'm not going into that. I'm just giving you an overview about what all things are there in explainable ML. So other than the global interpretations, there is something called a local interpretation. So here you ask a question, why did the model make specific decision for a single instance? Why it was like that, right? So why did the model make specific decision for these set of instances? So that kind of interpretation, you call it as local interpretation, right? So for doing this kind of local interpretation, you have certain tools or certain methods known as local interpretable model agnostic explanation, or more commonly known as LINE framework. So which is a very excellent method which is used for local interpretation. So I'll talk more about that in a while. So ultimately, this is going to interpretability is required when you want model transparency rather than just showing some accuracy and showing some results. If your model has a model transparency, it means that you are able to clearly understand what you have created, and you are clearly you have a hold on the algorithms whatever you have created, right? So we know that a typical machine learning model is all about leveraging an algorithm on top of data features to build a representation which maps input to potential outputs, right? So this whole process become more transparent if you have this interpretability factor, right? So just to show that in 2 slides, it will be like this. So right now, what you are doing, and with interpretable machine learning, what exactly can be done, right? So usually for a normal thing, if you're writing a program in Python for detecting an animal, right? So for these answers, most of the time you won't have a proper reply, right? But with when your model has more transparency, and if you're able to interpret those models, then if you can see the right hand side, the bottom side, you will be able to see, you will be able to answer all these questions without any trouble, right? So another application, so especially for military application, especially if you want to detect ceasefire violation, you may have an automatic AI/ML based system, but still a human intervention is required to take decisions, because if it takes some decision, and if that backfires, that is going to create problems between countries, right? So with interpretable ML, they will be able to clearly understand and report what exactly happened and why the model is saying so, right? So with this transparency and interpretability included into the basic machine learning chain, it looks something of this sort, right? You have a lot of pipes going on, right? The commonly used basic ML chain is shown in light gray boxes, right? You have the input data and you have the output results, all these things, right? So, and the black box models, the input output relations and scientific output can be derived by explaining the output results. So which is possible only by making use of the domain knowledge. So any kind of ML, that's what I was saying, the domain knowledge is really important. Sometimes in some projects, you have 95% of the domain knowledge coming in and you have only 5% role as a computer scientist, right? So roughly speaking, transparency considers the ML approach and interpretability considers the ML model together with the data, and explainability will consider the model, the data, and the human involvement, right? So ultimately, that is going to help us a lot if your algorithms are more interpretable and more explainable, rather than just trying some random algorithm for a particular problem. It makes a lot more sense, and it actually foster a better understanding and a cleverer overview of machine learning algorithms applied to data for a particular problem, right? Right. So basically, the ingredients of the explainable ML will actually improve the transparency and the interpretability, right? So you can do this in a multitude of different ways. I'll just quickly show you a figure which can actually give a better idea. So you have transparency, interpretability, and the integration of domain knowledge. So if you are trying to bring a transparency in design, so imagine that you are working to find out the stability of certain wooden blocks, right? And imagine that you have used ResNet and GoogleNet to formulate a binary classification task. So your task is to predict whether these wooden block towers will fall or not, right? So in a similar way, even if you have any kind of complex scenario, so if you're building a model, it might work or it might not work, right? So the reason is you don't know what is the structure of GoogleNet or what is the structure of ResNet, right? So imagine another scenario where these models are not only model, but also design transparent to some extent. So imagine that you construct a new model on your own to predict the trajectory of the wooden blocks, like in case if a tower is collapsing and how it is going to affect. So then you have a design transparent model, right? So if it comes to transparency in algorithm, that is heavily influenced by domain knowledge, because that is going to definitely differ, right? So if you're working on a project where you are able to you want to map the used and unused land cover, or you want to just map the changes, so then the kind of algorithm that will work over there, that is kind of different. And if you're working on a medical data set, then it is altogether different, right? So basically, these things, like all these things, and especially I'll just focus on one thing, that is the post hoc analysis. So this is a very interesting thing, where the word post hoc is usually, it consists of kind of statistical analysis that were specified after the data were seen, right? So this typically creates a multiple testing problem, because each potential analysis is effectively a statistical test. So multiple testing procedures are actually sometimes used to compensate, but it is often difficult to do it precisely. But the moment you do this post hoc check, it is when you conduct that kind of a check, then you can interpret any kind of result without any adequate consideration of the problem, like data dredging, where that usually you call it like spurious data. right? So that's one of the interesting thing about explainable machine learning, right? So basically, most of the approaches use interpretation tools to extract information from learned models and to help to scientifically explain the individual output or several outputs jointly. So this actually requires a lot of visualization. It might require a lot of different knowledge representation, right? And usually interpretation tools such as feature importance plots or heat maps can be used to explain the outcome by means of an interpretable representation of the input. So then obviously the next question is, how do you start, or how do you do this machine learning explainability or interpretation, right? So as I already mentioned, there are a lot of insights for the, different use cases, which includes debugging or information feature engineering, or directing the future data collection, or informing human decision making, and it ultimately builds trust among, trust about the model among its users, right? So out of that, one of the most common thing which we usually do is something called a permutation importance. So it is we actually do a kind of a feature importance test, and there are multiple ways to actually measure this feature importance. So some approaches answer very subtly different versions of the question, right? And other approaches have kind of documented shortcomings, right? So basically, when you talk about permutation importance, uh, it uses models differently than anything you've seen so far. So many people find it confusing initially. So let's think about an example. So let's imagine that you have a data set with a height of about few people at the age of 20, and the same people and their height at the age of 10. And also for the prediction, you have the size of the socks they are using at the age of 10, right? Now imagine that you want to build up a model to predict a person's height when they become 20 years old using the data that is available at age 10, right? So you have the age of a person at 10, right? And from that, you need to kind of predict what will be the size of the sock at when he is, or what is at his height when he is 20 years old, right? So basically, even if you put these data, say, imagine that you just shuffle the data just randomly, right? So even after that shuffling, you should be able to explain why something is happening. So this, in a crux, I can say that this permutation importance is actually will help in kind of randomly reordering a single column, and you will actually see how that is going to affect the model, right? So the model accuracy especially suffers if you shuffle a column that the model relied on heavily for predictions. So in that case, shuffling the age of the column with age 10 height would cause very terrible predictions, right? So basically, if we shuffled socks owned instead, like the size of the sock, that might result in a almost the same thing, right? So basically, the importance of each of these parameters will be known from these permutation importance, right? So another thing is about a partial dependence plot. So since it is almost time, I'll just quickly take you through what exactly these things. And if you have any question, I'll answer more on that. So the partial dependence plot is also, it's a kind of a marginal effect where one or two features have on the predicted outcome of a machine learning model. So you actually do that using this partial dependence plot. So the other one is, which is the most commonly used one, is called as Shap values, or sometimes you call it as Shapley values. This is a very interesting thing where it can actually extract the general insights from a machine learning model. And if you want to break down how the model works for an individual individual prediction, these SHAP values will actually help you in doing that, right? So imagine that why something has happened. You want to do a kind of local interpretation. You can just make use of SHAP values, right? And for your information, there are Python packages which will help you in understanding these things, right? So then there is a package called SHAP, SHAP. If you can just Google about it, you will get to know more about that. So these are some of the technique which can improve the machine learning interpretability. So the first thing is algorithmic generalization. So where you need to be very specific and uncover a certain desired outcome. The model itself will feel like a secondary element if you clearly know the algorithm, right? And as I already mentioned, LIME, or local interpretable model agnostic explanation. So it's actually a method developed by researchers to gain greater transparency on what's happening inside the algorithm, right? So along with that, you have SHAP, then you have something called a deep lift, so which will be a very useful model in the particularly tricky area of deep learning. So it works through a form of kind of backpropagation. It takes the output, then attempts to pull it apart by reading the various neurons that has participated and have gone into developing that original output, right? So it can even be used for kind of layer-wise relevance propagation, right? So a small comparison between LIME and SHAP, how it is being useful, right? So basically one is mainly for the global consistency or the global transparency. The other one is for the local interpretability, right? So how this is going to be useful is that on a smaller scale, if you imagine that you are say devising a device which will make use of a machine learning model, and this is how the explanation should look like. So this is a very simple model which I'm just showing, but when you have many features, imagine that you are trying to do something for, say, to find out liver cirrhosis or some kind of liver malfunctioning, then you have a lot of features, right? So you should be able to clearly explain why something is happening, right? So ultimately, that's all about this explainable machine learning. So obviously, it will produce more explainable models while maintaining a high level of learning performance, right? So it enables human users to understand, appropriately trust, and effectively manage the emerging generation of artificially intelligent partner algorithms or partner models in machine learning, right? So basically, the future of model interpretability is a very bright future. So you can take a look at something called Vialytics, which is Vialytics. Okay, let me just, if possible, I'll type it here. It's basically a German website where it can actually automatically do a lot of machine learning tasks. And also, you can take a look at something called H2O.ai. That also I'll just type there, H2O.ai. So here actually, in these things, you're actually talking about something called automatic machine learning, or in other words, you are actually implementing machine learning using machine learning. So that's the reason why I'm again stressing on the fact that unless and until you understand and do what you are doing, then obviously the work, whatever you do, might be kind of insignificant after 3 to 4 years. But if you clearly know what exactly you're doing, then you'll be able to continue your research in machine learning domain, right? Because right now you have a lot of Python libraries, like there is something called a teapot, where it will actually generate a whole pipeline right from data cleansing, augmentation to the prediction. It will automatically do it. You just need to put the data into that package, and the package will beautifully do the whole process for you. And you have something called the AutoKeras, which is again a Python library which will automatically do this, right? So in view of these models or these packages only, I'm just stressing on the fact that it's always better to have a research career in explainable machine learning or interpretable machine learning arena, so that whatever research you do, that is going to stay there for at least the next 15, 20 years, right? So these are some of the papers which I have made use in preparing this talk, right? So in case if you have any queries, you are always welcome to write to our data science